Shaq stepped into an elite fashion house, ready to drop thousands on a custom suit. But instead of service, he got laughed at. "Oh, we don't design for your kind." The room tensed, cameras rolled. But Shaq didn't get mad. He got even. What happened next turned humiliation into history. And by the end, the designer would be begging him to take over. Stay tuned, because this is one for the ages. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Shaq steps into an elite fashion boutique, expecting to buy a custom suit. Instead, the designer laughs in his face. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't new to luxury. He had spent decades walking red carpets, sitting courtside at the most exclusive events, and owning custom-made suits that turned heads. But when he stepped into Laurent Devereaux, the most prestigious fashion house in the city, he didn't expect the entire showroom to go silent. Whispers, sideways glances, a few raised brows. The boutique was a temple of wealth, glittering chandeliers, velvet chairs, and perfume that smelled like money. Wealthy clients, draped in designer labels, sipped espresso from fine china while being fitted for garments that cost more than a car. Shaq towered over the racks of couture suits, his broad frame wrapped in a sleek black hoodie and tailored jeans. He strolled toward the main counter, hands in his pockets, relaxed but observant. The man behind the counter, Laurent Devereaux himself, watched Shaq approach with a smirk. Thin, impeccably dressed in a navy pinstripe suit, Laurent looked more like an aristocrat than a fashion designer. His piercing blue eyes flicked over Shaq, scanning him like an out-of-place tourist. "Oh," Laurent drawled, his French accent thick. "I'm afraid we don't cater to your type." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You mean tall guys?" Laurent's lips curled into a patronizing smile. "I mean people with a different aesthetic." A few wealthy customers chuckled from the fitting area. A blonde woman in a pearl-studded blazer whispered something to her friend, both stifling giggles. Shaq exhaled slowly, keeping his cool. "Here we go again." "That's funny," Shaq said, tilting his head, "because last I checked, my money spends the same as theirs." He gestured to the high-profile clientele browsing the latest couture. Laurent let out a fake laugh. "Ah, but you see, monsieur, money does not equal class." He smoothed the lapels of his suit. "Laurent Devereaux creates fashion for a refined clientele. I simply do not think our designs would suit you." Shaq took a step closer, his towering presence making Laurent falter, just slightly. "That's not your decision to make." Laurent didn't flinch. Instead, he snapped his fingers toward the entrance. Two security guards stepped forward, broad-shouldered and ready. Laurent adjusted his cufflinks and smirked. "I must ask you to leave." Shaq is about to be escorted out, but not before the rich customers add their insults. Shaq had experienced disrespect before. He had walked into boardrooms where people underestimated him, sat at tables where they assumed he was just an athlete with money to burn. But this wasn't just disrespect. This was a spectacle. Laurent Devereaux, the so-called legendary designer, stood behind his grand marble counter, sipping an espresso, watching the scene unfold like he was the director of a play. And the audience? They were loving it. A woman in pearls, draped in an elegant black Chanel dress, sneered. "I mean, did he really think he belonged here?" A man beside her, swirling his champagne, smirked. "Maybe try a sportswear store, big guy. They might have something roomy." Laughter rippled through the boutique. Not loud, just loud enough. Shaq didn't flinch. He just stood there, calm, expression unreadable. The security guards, two tall, muscular men, but nowhere near Shaq's size, moved closer. One of them, the bald one with a stiff posture, sighed like he already regretted this. "Sir, please don't make this difficult." Shaq looked at him, really looked at him, and the guard hesitated. Laurent noticed that. His smirk twitched slightly, so he quickly took control again. "Oh, don't worry, Mr. O'Neal is a busy man. I'm sure he has other places to be." Another round of chuckles from the guests. Shaq exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. Then he smiled. A real, genuine smile. Because this wasn't humiliation. This was an opportunity. Shaq turned, moving with a slow, deliberate stride toward the exit. He didn't argue. He didn't snap back. He just let them believe they had won. And that's why no one noticed the way his fingers tapped lightly against his phone. Right before he stepped through the grand double doors, he paused. Just enough for the boutique's golden logo to shimmer under the lights. He didn't look back. He didn't need to, because he already knew. Laurent had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Shaq didn't record anything, but someone else did. Shaq had barely stepped out of the boutique when his phone started buzzing. One notification, then another, then 5 more. At first, he ignored them, thinking it was just his usual social media alerts. But when his manager's name popped up on his screen, twice in a row, he knew something was up. He picked up. "Yo, what's up?" His manager's voice was urgent. "Bro, have you seen this?" Shaq frowned. "Seen what?" A link popped up on his screen. Shaq tapped it. It was a video. The thumbnail. Laurent Devereaux, mid-sneer, standing inside his boutique. The caption? "Shaq just got humiliated at Laurent Devereaux. You won't believe what they said." Shaq hit play. The video started with him walking into the boutique, scanning the racks. Then, the moment. Laurent's smug voice. "Oh, I'm afraid we don't cater to your type." The pearl-clad woman sneering. Did he really think he belonged here? The man sipping champagne chuckling. "Maybe try a sportswear store, big guy." Then, the final shot. Shaq, calm as ever, turning toward the door, his fingers tapping lightly against his phone, and that subtle smirk. Then a dramatic cut to black. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Who filmed this? He scrolled down. The account belonged to Maya Evans, a young fashion blogger. Her caption? "I was at Laurent Devereaux today when this happened. I had to record it because no way was I letting them get away with this. Spread this. The world needs to know." And the world was knowing. 10K views, then 100,000, then 1 million. Celebrities were sharing it. News outlets were reporting on it. People were outraged. Laurent Devereaux had always been a symbol of exclusivity. But now it was a symbol of arrogance, racism, and everything wrong with the fashion industry. People were calling for boycotts. Influencers were demanding accountability. Meanwhile, Shaq's phone kept buzzing. A text from an A-list designer. "Hey, Shaq, let's talk. I have an idea." Shaq leaned back, a slow grin forming. He cracked his knuckles, eyes gleaming. Oh, this just got interesting. Shaq could let this slide, but that's not his style. The video had gone beyond viral. Shaq sat in his home office, scrolling through social media. The clip of Laurent Devereaux's smug dismissal had racked up over 10 million views overnight. Celebrities, influencers, and everyday people flooded the comments, calling out the designer for his arrogance. News channels had picked it up. Some were even debating whether luxury fashion had a race problem. His business manager, Reggie, sighed, tossing a tablet onto the desk. "Shaq, the internet's already doing the job for you. The backlash is killing them." Shaq smirked. "And," Reggie leaned forward, "and you don't need to get involved. Their sales are plummeting. Let the market do its thing." Shaq shook his head. "See, that's the difference between me and you, Reggie." He put his phone down, cracking his knuckles. "I don't just watch things happen. I make them happen." Reggie groaned. "Oh no, what are you thinking?" Shaq leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I want to buy me a fashion house." Shaq grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at a name he hadn't called in years. He tapped the number. A deep, confident voice answered almost immediately. "Mr. O'Neill, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Shaq didn't waste time. "Laurent Devereaux, I need everything on them, what they're worth, who their investors are, and, more importantly, if they're for sale." A low chuckle came from the other end. "Going into fashion now, big man?" Shaq grinned. "Something like that. Give me an hour." Shaq ended the call and exhaled, tapping his fingers against the desk. This was going to be fun. Laurent sat in his boutique's VIP lounge, sipping espresso, surrounded by a group of wealthy clients and fashion insiders. They were laughing. The controversy didn't faze him. In fact, he was enjoying it. "This is what happens when the masses think they have a say in high fashion," he sneered, scrolling through his phone. "They'll be outraged for a week. Then they'll move on like they always do." His assistant, Claire, stood nearby, fidgeting with a folder. "Sir, our online store's traffic has dropped 60% overnight. Several major influencers have cut ties and—" Laurent waved his hand. "Please, these things happen. Our real customers don't care about social media tantrums." Claire hesitated. "What if this doesn't just blow over?" Laurent smirked. "Then we remind them who we are. He had no idea he was about to be reminded who Shaq was. Shaq's lawyer calls back. Shaq's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Tell me something good. His lawyer's voice was calm but firm. Boss, you're going to want to see this. Shaq sat up. I'm listening. Laurent Devereaux is in trouble. Their sales are crashing, their investors are panicking, and Shaq's eyebrows raised. And, the lawyer exhaled. They're looking for a bailout. Shaq grinned, stretching his arms. Perfect. Reggie's jaw dropped. Wait, you're not just calling them out. You're about to own them? Shaq laughed. Oh, it's going to be so much better than that. Laurent Devereaux strutted into his office, sipping imported espresso, completely unaware that his empire was crumbling beneath him. His assistant Sophie stood by his desk, pale-faced. Sir, we have a problem. Laurent chuckled, setting his cup down. Let me guess. More celebrities crying about that basketball player? Sophie hesitated. It's worse. She turned her laptop screen toward him. The headlines were brutal. Number cancel Laurent trends worldwide. Major sponsors cut ties with Laurent Devereaux. Elitist, arrogant, and outdated. Fashion house faces public backlash. Laurent's smile faltered. His fingers curled against the desk. This is just a phase. Sophie shook her head. Sir, our biggest investors are reconsidering their stake. Sales are down 23% in just 24 hours. Laurent swallowed hard. The video had done this. That stupid, grainy phone recording of him dismissing Shaq like he was nothing. It was everywhere. Celebrities were slamming him. Athletes were boycotting his brand. Even his own customers were demanding refunds. Laurent forced a laugh. Fine. We'll issue a statement. A generic apology. Crisis averted. Sophie bit her lip. It's too late for that. Just then, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, his top investor. His stomach dropped. Shaq leaned back in his chair, feet propped up on his desk, scrolling through his phone. The headlines confirmed it. Laurent's brand was falling apart. A chuckle rumbled in his chest. Man, this dude really thought he could get away with it. His business manager, Jordan, sat across from him. We just got word. 3 major brands just dropped Laurent. His stock is tanking. Shaq smirked. That's what happens when you play yourself. Jordan leaned in. So, what's the move? Shaq exhaled, stretching his arms. Simple. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. A voice answered on the other end. Shaq's grin widened. Yeah, set up a meeting. I'm about to buy me a fashion house. Laurent's phone rings again. He answers, expecting another investor. Instead, he hears a deep, familiar voice. Laurent, big man, we need to talk. Laurent Devereaux sat in his high-rise office, swirling a glass of Bordeaux in one hand, scrolling through his emails with the other. His lips curled into a smirk when he saw the subject line. Formal acquisition offer. Shaquille O'Neal. His laughter erupted, echoing off the sleek marble walls. His assistant, Sophie, peeked into the room, startled. Sir? She asked hesitantly. Laurent wiped a tear from his eye. You won't believe this. He tapped the email with manicured fingers. That basketball player actually thinks he can buy my fashion house. Sophie stiffened. Sir, you should at least consider. Laurent slammed his glass down. Consider? Selling to some celebrity athlete? This brand is art, Sophie. It's exclusive. Cultured. He scoffed. Not something that belongs to oversized sneakers and gold chains. She shifted nervously. Still, the company is in trouble. Laurent waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense. A few headlines, some bad PR. This will all blow over. Sophie's lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but she stopped herself. Laurent straightened his tie and picked up his phone. Draft a statement. Make it loud and clear. I refuse to sell. Let the world know that Laurent Devereaux will never be owned by an athlete trying to play businessman. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Of course, sir. Shaq sat in his office, phone in hand, watching the statement spread across social media. Laurent Devereaux denies Shaq's offer. My brand is not for sale. Luxury fashion CEO mocks Shaq's business attempt. Basketball stars should stick to sneakers, says Devereaux. Shaq simply chuckled. Man really thinks this is a game. His business manager, Jordan, placed a folder on the desk. You see this? Laurent's company is losing major investors by the hour. He can't afford to be this arrogant. Shaq shook his head. Dude's got too much pride. Let's fix that. He tapped his phone screen, Texting his lawyer 3 simple words. Plan B, crush him. Laurent's phone buzzes. He glances at the screen, and his smirk vanishes. His top investor is calling, and something tells him, this isn't going to be a friendly chat. Laurent Devereaux leaned back in his leather chair, legs crossed, exhaling a breath of arrogant satisfaction. His public statement had gone viral. News outlets were running with his words, and he could already see the headlines. Laurent Devereaux refuses to sell to Shaquille O'Neal. Basketball players should stick to sneakers, says fashion icon. Luxury versus sports. Who wins? He smirked as he scrolled through social media, basking in the praise from his usual elitist clientele. Finally, someone keeping standards high. Not everything should be for everyone. Stay in your lane, Shaq. Wealth isn't enough. You need taste. Laurent chuckled to himself, swirling a glass of wine. Sir? Sophie, his assistant, peered into his office, her voice hesitant. He didn't even look up. Tell me, Sophie, how does it feel to work for the most exclusive brand in the world? She swallowed. Sir, I think you need to see something. Laurent finally lifted his gaze, irritated. Unless it's a celebration post, I don't care. Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she placed a tablet on his desk. It's about Shaq. Laurent scoffed but glanced at the screen. His smirk vanished. Shaq calls for luxury boycott. The people decide what's high fashion. His eyes darted across the page. Shaq had mobilized the industry overnight. Major celebrities were pulling out of partnerships. Top designers publicly distanced themselves from Laurent's brand. Investors were panicking as stocks plummeted. More bad news flooded in. Luxury department stores canceled their bulk orders. Fashion Week models dropped out of Laurent's upcoming showcase. Social media exploded with influencers cutting up Laurent's designs. Laurent's chest tightened. This is just reactionary noise. It'll blow over. Sophie hesitated. Sir, I don't think so. It's escalating. His phone rang. Victor Aldridge, his biggest investor. Laurent forced a smile and answered, Victor, my friend. Shut up, Laurent. His breath hitched. Excuse me? You idiot, Victor seethed. Do you have any idea what you've done? Laurent straightened in his chair. I strengthened the brand. You just destroyed it, Victor barked. Do you know who Shaquille O'Neal is? That man is a business tycoon. He owns everything. And you just challenged him publicly? Laurent clenched his fists. It's just PR. It's war, Victor thundered. And you're losing. Laurent's fingers trembled as he refreshed his stock reports. Down 15% in one day. His emails flooded with urgent messages. Crisis meeting with shareholders. Immediate urgent. Accounts frozen pending review. Investor withdrawal. Immediate notice. Laurent swallowed hard. Victor, let's be rational. Victor cut him off. Here's what's rational. Fix this. Now. Or you won't just lose your brand, you'll lose everything. Click. Call ended. Laurent's heart pounded. This was spiraling out of control. Sophie, he rasped. I need a plan. Sophie hesitated, then turned her tablet toward him. A new tweet. From Shaq. Laurent's stomach dropped as he read the words. Laurent Devereaux wants to talk about high fashion? Let's talk about higher standards. Stay tuned. Change is coming. Laurent's hands shook. What does that mean? He whispered. Sophie bit her lip. Sir, I think he's about to do something big. Laurent's phone rings again. This time it's a number he's been dreading. His legal team. Laurent Devereaux's world was crumbling, and Shaq had just fired the final shot. Shaq's tweet hit the internet like a tidal wave. If luxury fashion doesn't want to include everyone, maybe it's time for new ownership. Within minutes, it was trending worldwide. The reactions came fast. Shaq, please buy the company. We need a brand that actually represents people. It's time for real change in fashion. Let's make it happen. Celebrities started chiming in. Athletes, musicians, actors, big names from every industry were rallying behind him. LeBron James commented, I'd rock a Shaq design suit. Let's make it happen. Rihanna reposted it with the caption, a luxury brand that actually gets diversity? I'm in. Zendaya simply wrote, fashion belongs to everyone. Do it, Shaq. Shaq leaned back, watching as the momentum built. His phone was buzzing nonstop. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Laurent was watching his empire collapse in real time. His inbox was full of urgent emails. Investor panic. Emergency meeting requested. retailers canceling upcoming collections, legal department warning, brand reputation at risk. He refreshed the company's stock price. It had dropped 27% in a single day. Laurent clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He had spent decades building this brand, carefully crafting its exclusivity, making sure only the right people had access. And now, it was slipping away. He turned to his assistant, Sophie. Get me the investors. Now. Sophie hesitated. Sir, they've already left. Laurent's chest tightened. What do you mean they left? They don't want to be associated with this scandal. They're pulling out. He felt his throat go dry. This wasn't just bad press. This was a full-blown crisis. Then his personal phone rang. Laurent looked at the screen. Board of Directors. Emergency call. He exhaled sharply before answering. This is Laurent. A voice came through, cold and firm. We need to talk. Now. Laurent's grip tightened on the phone. His worst fear had just been confirmed. He was no longer in control. Laurent realizes he might not own company much longer. Laurent Devereaux had built his empire on exclusivity, power, and arrogance. But at this moment, as he sat in a dimly lit boardroom facing his investors, he realized something chilling. He was no longer in control. The men and women sitting across from him weren't his allies anymore. They were wolves circling, waiting for the inevitable. One of the senior investors, a steely-eyed man named Victor Langley, tapped his fingers on the table. Laurent, let's not waste time. The numbers are catastrophic. Our stock has dropped another 10% since this morning. Retailers are distancing themselves. We are hemorrhaging money. Laurent clenched his fists under the table. It's temporary. This social media hysteria will fade, Victor scoffed. Temporary. Every major celebrity has turned against us. Our biggest endorsers have dropped out. Our best designers are quitting. Tell me, how do you plan to recover from this? Laurent opened his mouth but had no answer. Another investor, an older woman with a sharp, no-nonsense tone, cut in. We have a proposal. Laurent stiffened. Victor leaned forward. Sell the company. Cut your losses before it's too late. Laurent's breath caught in his throat. You can't be serious. Oh, we're very serious, Victor replied. Either you sell or we liquidate. If you fight this, you won't just lose the company. You'll be drowning in lawsuits and debts. Laurent's mind reeled. His father had founded this company. This was supposed to be his legacy. But now, his legacy was crumbling before his eyes. For the first time, fear crept into his voice. Who's the buyer? The woman gave him a cold smile. Shaquille O'Neal. Laurent's blood turned to ice. The room spun. Shaq, of all people, the man he had humiliated, the man he had dismissed as not belonging in his world, the man who had orchestrated his downfall without breaking a sweat. Victor slid a document across the table. Shaq has made a formal offer. It's generous considering the circumstances. You sign this, and you walk away with something. If you refuse, he shrugged, you lose everything. Laurent stared at the papers. His name was on them. But beneath it, stamped in bold letters, was something that felt like a death sentence. Laurent Devereaux Fashion House. Acquisition Agreement. Shaquille O'Neal Holdings. His hands shook. His pride screamed at him to fight, to push back. But the numbers didn't lie. If he didn't take the deal, he wouldn't just lose his company. He'd be bankrupt. Swallowing his pride, Laurent reached for the pen. But before he could sign, his assistant, Sophie, ran into the boardroom, her face pale. Sir, you need to see this. Laurent glared at her. Not now. It's Shaq. He just posted something. She turned her phone screen to him. Laurent's heart stopped. It was a simple tweet. Not interested. I'll wait for the bankruptcy auction. The room went silent. Victor rubbed his temples. Well, Laurent, looks like you just lost your last chance. Laurent's vision blurred. He had just been played. Again. Laurent realizes Shaq isn't just taking his company. He's making him watch it burn first. Laurent Devereaux was once the king of exclusivity. Now he was nothing. It had taken less than a month for his empire to collapse. His brand was toxic, his investors had fled, and the luxury stores that once begged to carry his designs were now dumping his inventory at clearance prices. No one wanted to be associated with him. And at the center of it all, Shaquille O'Neal. Laurent sat alone in his now empty office, staring at his phone, waiting for a miracle that would never come. His company was officially bankrupt, Everything, his designs, his stores, his legacy, was about to go up for auction. Then the final nail in the coffin arrived. A headline popped up on his screen. Shaquille O'Neal acquires Laurent Devereaux's brand at auction for pennies on the dollar. Laurent's breath caught in his throat. He had built this empire for decades, and now Shaq had taken it for nothing. Across town, Shaq leaned back in his chair, the auction paperwork signed and sealed. "That's it," his lawyer confirmed. "The company is officially yours." Shaq smirked. "Nah, not his company. This is something new." He stood, stretching his massive frame, and turned to his business team. "Laurent's brand is done. The name Laurent Devereaux is poison. But the infrastructure, the supply chain, the stores, that has value." His team nodded, waiting for the next move. Shaq placed his hands on the table and grinned. "We're rebranding everything. New name, new message, and we're making luxury fashion for everybody." A silence filled the room, followed by a slow, growing excitement. One of his executives leaned forward. "What's the name?" Shaq turned to the giant screen in the conference room. With the click of a button, a sleek new logo appeared. O'Neal Bespoke. Luxury for everyone. Laurent had spent his career keeping people out. His designs were for the rich, the elite, the right kind of people. Shaq? He was about to flip that upside down. The first thing he did, he rehired every minority and plus-size model Laurent had ever rejected. At the first O'Neal Bespoke casting call, the energy was electric. Hundreds of hopefuls stood outside, many of them people the industry had overlooked for years. One woman, a plus-size model with deep brown skin, wiped tears from her eyes. "I auditioned for Laurent Devereaux 5 times, she whispered to a friend. "He told me I was too much. Now look at us." Shaq personally greeted the models as they arrived. "You belong here," he told them. For the first time in fashion history, luxury wasn't just for the few, it was for everyone. Meanwhile, Laurent watched the news unfold from a dingy hotel room, his hands shaking. He flipped through channel after channel. Shaquille O'Neal's O'Neal Bespoke announces first inclusive luxury line. Industry explodes. Former Devereaux employees speak out. Shaq gave us our jobs back. A new era in fashion? O'Neal Bespoke sells out in minutes. Laurent's heart pounded. He had spent decades making sure his designs were seen as exclusive, unattainable, better. And now, Shaq had taken everything he had built and made it bigger. His own name was wiped from the industry. Shaq hadn't just beaten him, he had erased him. Shaq steps onto the runway at his first fashion show, and the audience erupts. Laurent, watching from the shadows, realizes the world has officially moved on without him. Laurent Devereaux used to own Fashion Week. Now he wasn't even invited. He stood outside the massive event space, watching through the glass windows as Shaq's new brand, O'Neal Bespoke, made its grand debut. Photographers, designers, and celebrities flooded the entrance, each one more excited than the last. Everything Laurent had built, everything he had fought to keep exclusive, was now being celebrated under someone else's name. A giant LED screen flickered to life above the venue, displaying bold letters, O'Neal Bespoke, luxury for everyone. Laurent's stomach twisted. He clenched his fists as he saw the guest list. Supermodels, influencers, fashion icons, all people who once begged for his approval, were now fawning over Shaq's brand like he had just redefined luxury. And maybe he had. Inside, the energy was electric. Shaq walked through the backstage area, towering over the models, designers, and stylists, preparing for the biggest launch of the year. He was dressed in a custom navy suit, one of his own designs, and the moment he stepped onto the runway, the crowd went wild. He raised a hand, signaling for silence, then grinned. "Let's be real," he said, his deep voice echoing through the venue. "I never thought I'd be standing here. A 7-foot-tall ex-basketball player running a fashion house?" He chuckled. "Sounds crazy, right?" The audience laughed, eating up every word. "But here's the thing. Fashion should be for everybody," he continued, his tone turning serious. "Not just for the elite, not just for the right people. Luxury isn't about keeping people out. It's about making everyone feel unstoppable." A roar of applause shook the venue. Laurent, watching from outside, felt sick. Then the moment came. The first model walked down the runway, a stunning, plus-size black woman in a show-stopping silk gown. Then came a curvy Latina model in a sleek, tailored suit. Then a man in a wheelchair, styled flawlessly in a custom-fit tux. One by one, they walked with confidence, owning the runway. Laurent's breath hitched. These were all people he had rejected, people he had told weren't right for his brand. Now, they were the face of luxury. The audience gave a standing ovation, cameras flashing, voices cheering. Shaq grinned as he stepped forward, embracing his models, celebrating the new era of fashion. That's when a reporter turned to him and asked the final crushing question. Shaq, any words for Laurent Devereaux? Shaq paused for a moment, then smirked. Who? The crowd erupted. Outside, Laurent felt his knees go weak. His legacy, his name, his empire. It wasn't just taken, it was erased. Laurent stumbles away from the event, defeated. Meanwhile, inside, Shaq is just getting started. Shaq sat in the back of his car, looking out at the flashing city lights. Tonight had been a victory, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The launch of O'Neill Bespoke had shattered expectations, rewritten the rules of luxury fashion, and left the industry scrambling to catch up. But he wasn't done yet. He unlocked his phone, scrolling through the endless flood of messages, comments, and headlines. Shaq's fashion empire is already outselling Laurent's old brand. Diversity wins. O'Neill Bespoke is the future of luxury. Shaq turned a personal insult into a billion-dollar flex. Shaq chuckled. He had seen success before. Rings, trophies, MVP awards. But this felt different. This wasn't about him. This was bigger than just one man. He opened Twitter. For a moment, he stared at the blinking cursor, thinking carefully about what he wanted to say. Then he typed, "Exclusivity is outdated. Fashion is for everyone." He hovered over the post button. This wasn't just a message to Laurent. This was a message to every industry that tried to shut people out. He tapped the screen. The tweet was live. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Comments poured in. Shaq just broke the fashion industry. This man turned an insult into an empire. Legend. Gatekeeping in fashion is over. Welcome to the new era. The numbers climbed fast. 1 million likes, then 5 million, then 10. News outlets picked it up instantly. Celebrities reshared it. Fashion brands scrambled to release statements supporting inclusivity and luxury. Laurent, watching from his dimly lit apartment, felt his stomach turn. He had spent decades crafting his empire, building an image of exclusivity, making sure his brand only catered to the elite. Now, it had taken one tweet to make everything he believed in obsolete. His phone buzzed with an alert. He swallowed hard. Breaking news. Shaq just changed the industry forever. He set his phone down, burying his face in his hands. Meanwhile, Shaq leaned back in his seat, watching the city blur past. He had proven his point. This wasn't about revenge. It was about changing the game. He had built something that would outlive him. A brand that would open doors instead of closing them. A legacy that meant something. And the best part? It was only the beginning. The world had just witnessed history. And Shaq? He was already planning his next move.